Welcome to Learn Laws, where knowledge is power, not legal advice, just for education. Need real counsel, don't roll the dice. Always speak with a licensed attorney.
Welcome to Learn Laws. I'm James White, and we're here with attorney Andrew Easler. And today we're going to be talking about Florida LLCs, what they are, how to form one, and when to seek expert or when to seek advice. So Andrew, my first question to you is, what is an LLC?
So an LLC is a limited liability company, and its function is in the name. So it's a company that helps to limit your personal liability for the business operations.
Oh, okay. That's a pretty, I like that. That's a very concise explanation. I think that makes sense to me. So we have LLCs, then we have sole proprietorships. I hear all these different, structures, right? So we have Incs, we have sole proprietorships, LLCs, we have limited liability partnerships, general liability or general partners. What is the difference between an LLC and all the others?
Yeah, so a sole proprietorship or a general partnership is where your name is on the line, right? You are the person who's doing business with the consumer or the customer, or you and your partners are the ones doing business with the consumer or the customer, and therefore you or your partners are individually liable. So a step up from that is going to be a limited partnership, and then a limited liability partnership, and then of course above that we have the LLC, and then beyond that we have the corporation. The LLC is really the new kid on the block. It actually came to the United States back in 1977, and then in Florida, we adopted it in 1982, but it really didn't catch any kind of popularity until the 90s when we started making some changes to how it's formed.
Okay, so it is relatively new then. It's not like I wonder, Incs have been around since like modern day. I mean, they've been around for forever, right? That's very interesting. So what is the difference between, during my research for the show, when I asked a bunch of people around me, I'm like, hey, what questions, we're doing a show on LLCs, what questions would you ask an attorney? And one of the questions I had was, what is the difference between a member managed and a manager managed LLC? Because I think when people are forming an LLC, that's kind of something that comes up. But, am I a manager? Am I a member manager? What is the difference?
Yeah. So typically when you start up a partnership, you guys each have unlimited liability and you have unlimited control over the venture subject to whatever terms you guys put in. Same thing with an LLC. You can decide to be operating under an agreement like a partnership, where each individual member can have unlimited control over day-to-day operations. Whereas a manager-managed LLC is where the members have given up a lot of that day-to-day control to a third party or one of the members or more of the members who we call managers, who can open up bank accounts, do ordinary course of business type operations.
So managers can manage day-to-day, they can open up bank accounts, they can sign on behalf of the company. Members may or may not be able to do that, but generally a member, and if I am understanding properly or correctly, a manager manages the day-to-day, the business, and a member is most likelier than not to just be like almost like a silent partner, where they have a membership interest in the LLC, but their duties don't involve the day-to-day management, correct?
Yeah. So you can look at a member-managed LLC more like a true democracy, where you guys kind of agree to, handle day-to-day decisions, or you guys can elect or nominate an individual like a republic to handle those day-to-day operations. But when it comes to big decisions, life-changing decisions for the business, then you're still going to have to vote.
Okay, so depending on the operating agreement, which we'll get to later on, the importance of an operating agreement and what they actually do, that would outline all the roles and responsibilities of a manager managed LLC and a member managed LLC.
100%.
Perfect. Okay, so I decided, I don't want to be a sole proprietor. I don't need to raise money, so I don't want to I don't want to incorporate INC. I don't want to be a general partner because those aren't very popular. That would be very foolish, I think, for somebody to do a general partnership. If you're a general
partnership, you're taking on the liability that arises not only from your own activities, but the activities of your partners.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine being responsible for all your, your friends', decisions, and the whisk of the night.
Well, that's one of the interesting things is people who don't form some kind of separate entity or file with the Secretary of State, that's what they are by default. If you guys are going into business together and you haven't done anything, then you're treated as a joint venture, which is equivalent under Florida law as a general partnership.
So that's actually kind of scary when you think about that. I know this show's about LLCs, but general partnerships are actually very scary because if you're essentially in a general partnership and your business partner makes some really bad decisions, you're personally not, you don't get LLC protection, but you're personally liable. So I would never do a general partnership, but people are sometimes don't even realize they're in a general partnership until it's too late. And then they're like, oh my God, what did I get myself into and how do I get myself out of it? So, okay, I decided I want an LLC. I decided I'm going to, either have multiple members or just myself. So how does one go about forming an LLC? So, in my ordinary course of research for the show, I seen all these like online services that offered, like pay the filing, just the filing fees, the LLC's free. You've seen all these different things online and then and they're like, you range between, $150 and say $300 for the DIY. And I highly suggest nobody use a DIY website. That's just my personal opinion. You can do what you want to do. And then I looked at attorneys, and they charge between like $1,000 for, a flat fee, $1,000, something, whatever, $1,000 to $3,000. And I guess depending on how complicated your business model is and what kind of legal protections you need, it might go from there. So I think a lot of people naturally choose to go to the DIY services, right? Me personally, I've formed a lot of LLCs. So sometimes if I need something basic and quick, I'll just do it myself and then, worry about it later. But I don't do that anymore. I used to do that, I should say. So now I just use an attorney. So how does one go about forming an LLC if they want to do it themselves or they want to use an attorney?
Yeah, so the first thing you should be doing is making a determination as to whether you're going to be doing it yourself or if you're going to have other partners. If you're going to have other partners, then you guys need to sit down and set the ground rules and make sure you're on the same page with regard to how you're going to operate this business and how you're going to deal with problems that you can reasonably anticipate will arise. What if we need more money? How much money is it going to cost? Who's going to pay for the equipment that we have to buy? All of these kinds of things, you guys need to set out the roles and responsibilities. And if you can't agree on those things, then why pay anybody, whether that's a third-party provider or the Secretary of State or whatever, or an attorney, then why pay them? So
and I think
out first.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing about using a professional to do, an actual licensed professional or licensed attorney, accountant, because I think accountants can also form LLCs. They can't give legal advice, but they can form an LLC. So I kind of defeats the whole purpose. If you're trying to incorporate a business or form a business, you probably want to use an attorney for the whole process, right? You can use an accountant for the accounting aspect, the tax classification aspect, but obviously, I think an attorney would be beneficial. And I find with a lot of people, again, because this kept coming up in my research, right? Like cheap formation services, whatever. A lot of people, they register their business, no problem, but they don't, like you said, they don't think through what they're trying to do. They don't understand share cap or membership capital or membership interest. Is that what they call it? Membership capital.
So capital contribution.
Capital contribution. That's what it's called.
Yes. And then other, probably even more important is capital commitment.
Capital commitment. So they don't understand capital commitments. All these capital accounts. They don't understand what happens when the business partner dies or what happens when they die if they don't have a business partner. They don't understand anything about corporate veils and how they can be pierced, meaning that even if you have an LLC, they can still come after you personally if you don't do things properly. So I think a lot of people are naturally inclined to use these cheaper formation services because they don't understand and they don't know what they don't know. Not that they don't want to use an attorney, but paying $1,000 or $2,000 to $200 or $300, when you're starting a business, that little bit makes a big difference, right? So how do we do form one? So obviously, let's talk about from an attorney's perspective, right? So somebody in your practice, somebody comes to you, they want to form an LLC. What happens from there?
So first thing we're going to do is determine what kind of business it's going to be, and then make sure that they have thought out all of the individual processes about the risks, the planning, the structure, how you're going to govern. If you have another member, if you're having multiple other members, are you planning on hiring employees? Are you not hiring employees? What's the expected revenue? We go through a full gamut of what the plan is. just so that we can make sure that we're setting you up right from the beginning rather than coming back later on and saying, oh, crap, we knew that we were going to add partners in, but we never really put that together in the first place.
So it's almost like doing a little mini business plan. That's what I consider whenever I speak with an attorney, and sometimes it's you, sometimes it's other people, depending on the state and the situation I'm in. And I almost feel like it's a little mini business planning session, right? So if I may know my industry, I may know what the services I want to provide, I may be an expert in that field, but there's a lot of questions that I may not even think to ask myself that I think that an experienced professional will help me determine, and then I can make choices and steps based on that feedback, right? So the question and analysis type aspect of it. I decided, I'm going to use an attorney. I'm going to do a consultation, have my little mini business plan. I don't know what to name my company. So obviously, that's another show in itself, but to choose a name, what would the first thing that you would do when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to form an LLC? What should I name my company? Does that come up a lot, that question?
Yeah, quite often, particularly if they're starting up a holding company, or they might have an idea of what they want to name it, but then they don't realize that it's not available.
So what would you suggest? So what I do when I'm forming, before I come to you, is I generally check, I do a Google search, right? Obviously, I think that's or some sort of web search with the specific company name that I want to incorporate, that I have an idea of, because that will tell me almost immediately whether there's other competitors, whether in my local market or whether it's, in another state or nationally. So again, that goes into the mini business planning section. I would think that if you do a Google search for the name that you want, and somebody already has that name, say in California, New York, Illinois, wherever, and if you want to grow nationally, that's probably not the right business name. And then there's other trademarking issues there. So I generally start with a web search. Is that a good way to start?
Yeah, 100%. So start with a web search. If you're satisfied that you haven't found anything, you're on page 10 of Google search results and you still haven't found anything, then go on to your Secretary of State website. So in the state of Florida, we have sunbiz.org, and that's the place where you keep.
That's the official website, right? Yep. That's the official. There's a lot of, I think there's a bunch of other ones out there. So just be careful, because I find there's so many, I don't want to say spammy, but just very shady.
Let's call it misleading.
Misleading, yeah, just misleading. So, they do AdWords and they click. So make sure when you're going to sunbiz.org that it's actually the right website and you're not clicking on some ad, that pretends or misleads you into thinking that they are an official, government agency or agency of Florida. That's I think super important. So we go online. And then what do you do once you hit that website?
So on that website, there's 3 total search databases that you want to look at. The first is the company registry. So you look and see if there's any companies with a name or similar names that are already registered. If you're satisfied that there's none there, then you want to check the fictitious name registry.
Yeah, that one. That actually I always forget this one. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I'm sure other people forget this too. So the way it works in Florida, when you go online, you search for a corporation, it pulls up LLCs, Incs, these kind of things, but it doesn't pull up fictitious names. Right. I don't know why they wouldn't
some
centralize
states
that
combine
search.
Them,
they do,
but Florida does not.
So you have to do the fictitious name because they have what we call first right of use when it comes to trademark or intellectual property law, right? So you don't want to incorporate am I right in saying that? Because I don't want to give, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, so just filing fictitious name is sometimes not enough to establish first right of use, because you have to use it in commerce.
Got you, but it just complicates it.
Evidence to prove that you have used it. So definitely is going to be a big red flag. If you see a fictitious name already registered with the name that you want to use, that's something you're probably going to talk to your attorney about, but probably not going to be a good solution.
Of course. And then I generally will also, just because I'm a little extra, because when you've done a few LLC formations, or when you're an entrepreneur, you go through a lot of these things and you learn over time what you need to do to prevent some of these disputes or mistakes later on that cost you a lot of money. I've seen situations where you form an LLC, you wrap your van, you do your flyer, postcards, business cards, website, whatever you're doing, and then all of a sudden you get a cease and desist letter for 2 or 3 months later saying, hey, you're using my trademark. Like, what are you talking about? I don't even understand what a trademark is. So I think what I do is I always go to the Federal Register, United States Patent Trademark Office, You can just, what's this acronym?
USPTO.
Just, I put that in Google, click on the link. I do a search, make sure they're not dead. You can do dead or alive, but I generally look at the alive ones or the ones that are live, LIVE, and then go from there. And then I, will reach out to my attorney, which is you, and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Is that kind of what you suggest, the kind of the process somebody should take?
Yeah. And there's also a trademark database that's held by the Florida Secretary of State as well.
Okay, so you can go to Florida as well.
Less popular because it's limited to the jurisdiction of Florida than USPTO, but certainly you can look in there too.
Yourself, do you do that process as well? Just to because obviously you're a professional, you're trying to give proper legal advice to potential clients if you have any, et cetera, right?
Yeah, and again, if you're doing your own USPTO search, there's trademark law is a whole niche profession within the legal field.
Yeah.
And so, looking at and pulling up a search, you may not know to search with the right terms. So definitely a good place to start is with the name that you want. But then we have a rule that says you can't be confusingly similar with other names of other.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really tricky.
And it can get really tricky.
Yeah.
And so you might think, oh, well, this isn't confusing. This is not going to, confuse me. Or you might say, oh, there's already somebody out there with my name, but they're in a completely different class. And so they're not even competing with you. They could be McDonald's plumbing services, not McDonald's the restaurant. You know what I mean? So it's certainly a good place to start, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make your name either available or unavailable.
And that's where nuances come in. Yeah, that's where attorneys come in. They can help you understand those little nuances that make a big difference. Like details matter, right? So it's all about the details. Okay, so what would be the first step? So I go to sunbiz.org, I file it myself or hire an attorney, right? Obviously, we suggest hire an attorney. The second step would be to, the first step would be trademark, looking at the trademark database, all the fun stuff, going to sunbiz.org, then entering my company name and details. And then it gets to a section where it says registered agent, right? And so this is where I think a lot of people get very confused is like, first of all, what is a registered agent? Do you know what that is? Yeah.
So a registered agent is the person who is authorized in the state of Florida to accept service of process on your behalf. And that's a big mouthful. Yeah. So I'm gonna put it in even layman's terms. It's the person who's going to notify you when you get sued.
Okay.
So when they go to hand you that lawsuit, they're going to hand it to this person, and that person's supposed to hand it back to you and let you know.
So who can be a registered agent in Florida?
So anyone in the state of Florida with a Florida address.
Now, is that pretty common? So if you're forming an LLC in another state, is that kind of the same commonality, like anybody that can take service of process?
Yeah, so some states have licensing requirements for the registered agent. You have to register with the Secretary of State in order to become a registered agent first.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So state of Florida does not have that. They just say, hey, anybody you designate that you trust is going to notify you when you get sued, that's the person.
So it could be, you could make yourself the registered agent, right?
Yeah.
What are the risks? Because now that I mentioned that, I just thought, okay, so I'm a registered agent myself because I'm too cheap as an entrepreneur. When I start up, I may not have a lot of money, whatever. So I'm just going to make myself the registered agent because, maybe I will get sued. Maybe I won't. Maybe somebody will serve me. Maybe they won't. But I'm out working. I'm on a business trip and they serve my address, right? They have proof of service. First of all, does somebody have to sign for that proof of service or could it just be delivered to your registered agent without signature?
So it depends on what kind of service it's going to be. If it's just a letter or a notice of that they're anticipating a lawsuit, then they will probably not require a signature. If it's a regular place of business, they can leave it with a receptionist. If nobody's around, they can make multiple attempts. If they're not able to serve anybody at that registered address, they can go after an officer listed. And if they can't find an officer to get to serve, then they actually notify the Secretary of State.
So I would not recommend being a registered agent yourself. I would recommend using a professional service, a licensed attorney, preferably. You could use an accountant as well, but I would not suggest using one of these off-the-shelf registered agent services that charge like $49 or $69 or whatever they charge. Only because I think having an attorney do it or an accountant, they have some sort of malpractice insurance, right? So the risks, and this happened to me. This happened to me. It was so crazy. So I was my own registered agent, and I was served. As a frivolous lawsuit happens all the time, and I was served, and I was out of town, and my employee decided that they were going to leave it on my desk underneath a bunch of paperwork. And obviously, you know, as an entrepreneur, we're busy, we're moving, we're shaking, money making, doing what we're doing. And guess what? That lawsuit was on the bottom of my stack of paper, and I didn't realize that I even had a lawsuit. And I got a default judgment. I'm like, what's this default judgment? I have no clue what this is. This is wrong. Oh my God. So then I reached out to an attorney, and they're like, yeah, you got a default judgment. And luckily we were able to reopen that default because it was COVID and there was some exceptions there. But that made me realize, that's when I said, Andrew, you're my registered agent. I'm going to send everything to a law firm now, because I don't want that responsibility of making sure my employee gives it to me. I don't know if they have or not, but at least with an attorney, you know, there's some sort of malpractice insurance. So if you forget to, you know, the law firm forgets to give me my stuff, if something happens, then, you know, I can go after your malpractice insurance.
Yeah. And another thing that people like about having a third party registered agent is that they don't have to put their personal address.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't have an office location that you're in Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, then, and you're working from home, that your home address is where you're going to be. And if you're the registered agent, you should be putting your home address.
Of course.
Now people who might want to be suing you know where you live. That's not necessarily something.
And I think having a professional be your registered agent, like an attorney, I think it takes away a lot of the drama. So, you know, when you're starting an LLC, you may or may not know, maybe you're an experienced founder, entrepreneur, and you do this all the time. But for those that don't understand, sometimes having a law firm as a registered agent can stop a lot of lawsuits or drama before they begin, right? So if another lawyer is serving another lawyer, they're going to know that person's more serious. They have protection, essentially. If it's just like your individual self that is being served, you may have a bully that comes after you and tries to intimidate you and scare you. And at that point, you have to go see an attorney anyways. So why not just have that attorney be the registered agent and deal with it at that point and try to mitigate some of those, you know, issues or some of those dramatic issues that come up. So we got a registered agent. We know what that is. We know the consequences of not having the proper registered agent. What about an operating agreement? So we incorporate our LLC. We choose a registered agent. We choose who's going to be the member, who's going to be the manager of the LLC. Oh, we covered that, correct? The manager.
Yeah,
We've covered that.
Member manage versus.
So we understand all that, right? Now let's get to the operating agreement. So this is a really overlooked, the most important aspect, I think, of besides hiring an attorney to form your LLC. And if an attorney forms an LLC without discussing an operating agreement, I might get a second opinion. Because that should almost be essentially the first topic discussed is the operating agreement, because that's sort of a mini business plan in a way. So what is an operating agreement, Andrew, and why are they so important for an LLC to have one?
Yeah, so your LLC, technically, the minimum requirements to make it alive is to file articles of organization. That's the original filing that you provide to the Secretary of State to let them know that you have started this business. But that is just a skeleton, right? You're just bones sitting there. Okay? Yeah. Now, the operating agreement you can liken to meat on those bones and skin on those bones. This is now how you're going to govern yourself internally. It also defines and creates the relationships between the members. It also can help avoid probate through certain estate planning strategies and help with liability protection.
So an operating agreement is actually very important, and this is why I said it's one of the most overlooked aspects of when people are forming an LLC, because they're not necessarily needed, right? It's not like a requirement. You don't have to file it with the state. Right. It's more of like an internal document, right? So what happens if you don't have an LLC? Because I know this happens all the time. People choose to do it themselves. They go online, they do sunbiz.org, they put their name in there, they put a bunch of information in, and then they start their business, right? So what are the consequences of not having a proper operating agreement?
Yeah, if you have no operating agreement at all, then if there's a dispute internally, then the judge in the court is going to have to fall back on the revised Uniform Limited Liability Companies Act in the state of Florida for a Florida LLC. So you're basically defaulting to what the legislature wants you guys to govern. And if you don't like the way that the legislature has decided you should be governing amongst yourselves, whether that's voting percentages, rights to take dividends, dissolution, wrongful dissociation, all of these individual situations that maybe you have a different idea than
Correct.
what that legislature is thinking when he's putting in that vote for that statute.
Like death of a business partner, how that's handled, what to do in certain disputes, who's responsible, the roles and responsibilities of each individual. So yeah, I think operating agreements are like a super important aspect of it. And obviously, you can get one online, a template. Again, I don't suggest using templates at all. It's just, you're always asking for trouble. It's just not worth it. What is an average attorney in Florida? I don't know if you know this, but what is an average attorney in Florida charge for say a business, say we want to form a business and we just want the package, right? So I need, an LLC formation. I need the mini business consult, an operating agreement, and maybe some other business advice. Like, what is it generally, like an hourly thing or flat fee for people, or is it all over?
Yeah, it kind of depends on who you're going to, right? If you're going to a bigger law firm, a nationwide law firm or something, they're going to want you to set up a retainer. They're usually not into the flat rate stuff. They're all about billable hours, for better or for worse. Nothing against that. But you're not going to necessarily know how much it's going to be right off the outset. And they're not going to tell you how much it's going to be because they don't know.
My favorite, when you say billable hours, the first thing that comes to mind, what was that movie called? Billable Hours. What was that? Do you remember that movie name? Oh, it's like, welcome. I think, what was his name? I forget.
Was it George Clooney?
George Clooney, yes. It was a George Clooney movie. Yeah, that was, when you said that, billable hours. Anyways, yes, it's very.
Okay, maybe somebody can tell us in the comments.
Anyways, there you go. So, okay, so some charge hourly, right, and then some charge flat fee. Is flat fee becoming more popular now? I think personally it is.
Yeah,
in
for
my
a
personal
small
opinion.
business, medium-sized business, people want to know how much it's going to be, even if it's a range, right? And certainly, if you decide you want to make super complicated operating agreement with a million rules, of course, a flat rate's not necessarily going to cover that. But for most people, the cost for a whole package is anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000.
And that's Florida. That's pretty much standard across Florida, I would assume.
Correct.
And if you go with one of these DIY services, which again I don't recommend, but okay, if you do, what is that going to like? Probably, my experience, like under $300, under $400. So for the extra, couple $100, you get actual legal advice that's catered, personalized to you. You may or may not get a professional registered agent, because sometimes, lawyers don't act as professional agents, registered agents. A lot of times they do. It just depends on the attorney and the practice. Right. And then the most important part is you get the malpractice part of that, right? So you're getting a mini business plan. They're helping you ask questions that you may not know about. And then you get a proper operating agreement that's tailored towards you, a proper formation that's tailored towards you, not just some template that you may not be suited for you.
Right. And you actually get the opportunity to start evaluating some of the unknowns, right? In the world. When you're starting out a business, most small business owners have never had to deal with some of the issues that are brought up in the operating agreement. So, for example, let's say you started up a coffee business and you were a sole proprietor and you were very successful for 15 years and now you want to let your top barista take over.
Yeah.
And so you want to add them as a member and start talking about, updating the operating agreement to reflect that. Well, some of the questions you might start thinking about is like, how much is an initial capital commitment going to be for that new barista? And is it realistic for them to have a commitment of $20,000? So, moving in. So these are some kind of questions that maybe you hadn't thought about, but are really important for the continuity of the business, right? Because in COVID, right, coffee shops really took a hit. Right?
Yeah.
People stopped going into coffee
restaurants,
shops.
coffee shops, hotels.
You had a to-go window, I guess. Maybe it was nice. But so you have this situation where the market has completely created a detrimental impact on your business. And maybe you have the savings in order to keep it going, but now you've got a 50% partner who does not have that same level of savings. And you got to pay payroll. You got to buy more coffee beans that have just gone up.
Your lease has gone up because of inflation, whatever the case is.
All of those things. And now you've got to take money out of your pocket. Are you okay with the other person saying, I can't afford it?
So that would prevent hopefully prevent disputes, right? Because all that's outlined, and an expert or somebody that has experience in that field can understand what could potentially happen, the potentials.
If you just had a template, what's the likelihood that you would see that little blank line that says initial capital commitment and you would just say 0?
Or what about what happens when I pass away, right? A lot of these templates don't include like, clauses in there.
I've never seen a template that includes
estate planning
transfer on death.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So okay, so we got the operating agreement done. Now we hear about this term called an EIN number. So that's employer identification number. That's needed 99.9% of the time if you want to like actually do business. You can form an LLC without one. You can do an operating agreement without one. But you really can't do anything without one, as far as like opening a bank account, getting a credit card, applying for contracts, bidding, and so forth. So what is an EI number? We already know it's employer identification number, but what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's just like your social security number is for the IRS. It's the same thing, but for the business. So just basically letting the IRS know that, hey, I have an entity out here that has now started to do business. It's going to accumulate revenue or losses. And I'm going to have to keep updating you on how that's going. And so it's the unique number that identifies that business.
Okay, so it's pretty. I mean, and so you can now again we don't even charge at the firm for this because it's so simple, right? You can just go to the EIN to go to like the actual IRS website, the official website. Type in. I just usually Google it. Of like EIN IRS or something. It'll pop up. Now you're going to get a lot of ads. Do not click on the ads because they're going to charge you for this. But you can do this in about 20 minutes, if that, as long as you know the tax classifications that you want, right? And that's the big thing. You're not an accountant, but we've done this enough where what's the difference? What type of tax classifications are there? There's like the S corp, the C corp.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yes.
So the LLC is the new kid on the block, which means when it came in 1977 in Wyoming, and later on, second place was Florida in 1982. The IRS kind of said, we want you to tell us how you want to be classified. We're not going to change the revenue code, revise all the thousands of pages just to accommodate this new experiment that you guys are doing. So with an LLC, you get to choose to be taxed as a corporation, which most people really don't want.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, I mean, it
results in double taxation because you're going to be taxed at the corporate level, and then any dividends are going to be taxed on the individual level. So most people don't want to do that, but there may be situations where you have foreign investors or multiple classes of stock
where you need that.
Outside of that, you can elect to be taxed as an S corp, which is a pass-through entity, which allows the taxes to go directly to the owners. Really, the benefit over the S corp and the partnership, which is the next tax classification, is employment tax benefits. You don't have to pay certain FICA taxes on the S corp selection. But
interesting.
Yep. So talk to your CPA about the expected revenue, your operations, if you're going to have pay wages, payroll, that kind of stuff. That'll help you determine whether you're going to be an S corp or a partnership.
Sure, and you want to do that ahead of time, right? Because it is kind of a pain to transition, when you're operating as a certain like S corp or a partnership or something. And I think the IRS, again, I'm not an accountant, but I think the IRS, if you have 2 or more members, it's automatically a partnership, right? So that's sort of an S corp to be sort of. I mean, it's different, but yeah, again, talk to your accountant. I'm not a CPA. So the reason why we form an LLC or form any corporation is obviously the corporate veil, right? Because we don't want to be personally liable for actions on behalf of the business. So that protects us. Now, I hear this term sometimes, not all the time. It's called piercing the corporate veil. So that is like something that, if you don't do this, I'm going to sue your company and I'm going to pierce the corporate veil because you frauded me or you did this or you did that. These are arguments in civil litigation that come up all the time, right? Especially civil litigation.
Yep.
So what is the corporate veil, and how does an LLC help prevent people from piercing corporate veil? Or what do you need to do with your LLC to prevent somebody from piercing the corporate veil?
Yeah. So the whole reason that we create a business entity and file it with the Secretary of State is to let everyone know that you are no longer dealing with me, Andrew Easler, the individual. You're dealing with the business, which is now in between the customer and the original person who formed the company. So that is there to segregate liability, because now instead of having a contract with me personally, you have a contract with the business itself. So that's the idea. Now, the legislature really doesn't want that to be fluffed to the side, right? The idea is that people can have investment-backed expectations, take risks, start businesses, and then, hey, if things, due to no fault of my own, things fall apart, no harm, no foul, we're going to move on and try another thing. And the customers, the investors, the consumers, they all understand that how a business works, right? It can be successful or it can fail. The piercing the corporate veil is designed for people who are trying to take advantage of the system. Okay.
Like fraudsters and these type of people, right?
Yeah. I mean, fraudsters or even maybe grossly negligent people. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't
Sloppy.
have the full intent, but it's almost ridiculous. Right. It's a rare situation to be pierced, for the veil to be pierced, but you're looking at situations where somebody is treating the business as their alter ego, right? We are using company revenue to buy my own groceries every day. You know, I'm using it to pay my own personal rent, pay my car payment, which again, that's okay in certain circumstances. But, you know, these are all factors that the court is looking at. Hey, are you treating this as a separate entity that's between you and that consumer? Or are you basically treating it as just a way to shield yourself from liability because you're doing reckless things? So for
That makes
example,
sense.
you know, you're buying, maybe let's say you're a parachute company and you're sewing up parachutes every day. And instead of buying the right type of material that's going to withstand the force winds that are required for a parachute, you decide to go and make it out of burlap. Okay. Well, that is pretty reckless. It's a high risk situation. And you didn't put any money into the business and you got no insurance.
Yeah.
Right. So people are dying left and right by using your parachutes. And you want to say, oh, court, you can't come after my assets because I have this LLC that I formed. The court's going to say, okay, well, you haven't kept up with your corporate compliance, right? You haven't filed your annual returns, let's say. That's one of the benefits of an LLC is really that's the only thing they really care about. Okay.
Yeah.
They're
Not like an
minimum
Inc.
requirements. Certainly it's going to help if you have records, minutes, those kinds of things.
Sure.
But in a corporation, that's very important in the piercing the corporate veil analysis. Another situation, again, if you've capitalized it well enough. If you have $1 million in a very high risk situation, okay, well, go take that $1 million instead of going after me personally.
Yeah, correct. Because I capitalized it right. What about insurance? Does insurance help prevent people from piercing the corporate veil?
Yeah, if you adequately insured for the risk involved in your business, that's another way.
Adequately, though. Like, so when you said adequately, so if I have like a liability policy of $10,000 and I, like you said, in the parachute company, that's probably not adequate insurance. Somebody's going to look at it and say, that's not adequate.
Right.
Right, where $1 million or $2 million liability would be more adequate.
Correct.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, perfect.
And then obviously, if you're doing anything that's super sketchy or fraud involved, right? If you're doing things that are criminal, you know, if you're deceiving people, you're charging them and you're telling them that it's not burlap. You're telling them that it's highest quality materials. And
they can do that too.
Those are the kinds of things that judges are looking at to pierce the corporate veil.
So when you say all you have to do legally is file the annual return, that's one of the basic things I guess you have to do, right? What is an annual return and when is it due by in Florida? And what are the penalties if you don't, or what are the fees and what are the penalties if you don't file it on time?
Yeah, so in the state of Florida, we have pared down the requirements to keep a company active and do its normal corporate compliance for LLCs. So the bare minimum is to just check in with the Secretary of State and let them know that you're still alive and pay them their fee. Okay.
Yep.
So ABC LLC, hey, we're still here. Same information, or we've updated our address, or we've updated the people who are authorized to bind the company on your registry. Here's your fee. Thank you and have a good day. That's literally what the annual report is.
Okay, and what's that? What was the cost of that? Was like I think it's like 140, under 138 or something.
138 something, right?
Yeah, it's under $140. So okay, so you pay your annual fee, you're good to go. So what happens if you don't file it?
Yeah, so it's due by May 1st, and if you don't file it, then the Secretary of State does what's called an administrative dissolution. Okay, so they're basically saying, hey, you haven't checked in with us. We're just going to assume you've passed away, right? This LLC is no longer in existence, so we're going to let everybody else know that you haven't kept up with it. You haven't let us know that you're alive, so if you're looking to do business with this person, sign a new contract or anything else, you're on notice that this business is no longer active.
On SunBiz or an active LLC or an active business in Florida.
Correct.
So if you run into that situation, which happens a lot because people get busy, they forget, they just, whatever, it happens a lot. And so I need to, after May 1st, obviously, because I didn't file, I have a $400 fee. So what happens in the event that I haven't done it for a couple of years? Like if it's administratively dissolved for like 2, 3, 4 years, can I go back and then pay the $400 and have it activated again?
Yep, you have to pay all of the backed fees. So the late fee and all of the other.
Okay, so that could be
years.
like, that could go, so if you have like 2 or 3 or 4 years, that could be like 800, 1200, 60, I mean, that could add up.
You have to file all the annual reports that have been overdue. Now,
So-
some states have a limitation on how long that period can go before you can just say, okay, give up. You're not going to be able to revive it.
Yeah.
The state of Florida has no requirement. So you can go for 15 years and pay, as long as you pay them all of the fees, you can bring it back to life.
So if you're administratively dissolved and you have a registered agent and gets served with a lawsuit or served with some sort of legal paperwork formality, right? Do you have to then to respond to that lawsuit? Do you have to reactivate your company?
So you're allowed, after a company has been dissolved, to do things that are necessary to wind up the affairs.
Okay.
Now, if you are going to actively participate in litigation, you typically need to have an active company. But in defending a lawsuit, there's some exceptions. But if you're going to be doing a counterclaim, then that's more active involvement, and that may need you to revive that company.
Okay, perfect. And so every year you have to do that by May 1st, or you're penalized $400 as the fee. And then you know, obviously it makes it harder to do business because if you're trying to sign a contract or somebody's trying to do business with you and they do a search of you and your company says administratively dissolved, first of all, it's not very good. Sign.
It's a warning to them. Hey,
this
buyer
person's not
beware,
compliant.
Right?
Correct.
This person is no longer an active company. So it should be a warning sign to anybody doing business with somebody who's got an administratively dissolved LLC.
So for Florida LLCs, you file the annual return. It's like $138.50 or something, under $140. There's no requirements for annual minutes, annual meetings, nothing like that.
Just let them
the
know
annual return.
whether the information in your articles of organization have changed, really. So the principal address, mailing address, registered office, and who's authorized to buy the company.
Okay, and then to add members, to add managers, that would be done when you're filing that annual return, correct?
Yeah, you can do that at the same time. If that's changed.
So what I
or
do
you can do an amendment.
Yeah, what I do in a lot of my situations is when, you know, I'm making a decision, I'll generally make those decisions like at the very end of December or beginning of January. So when I'm saying, hey, do you want to be my business partner? I'll say, hey, I'm going to add you on like January 3rd or something that you can, that's when everything's effective. That way I don't have to pay an additional fee. And I just do it at the time that I'm renewing my LLC, right, with the state. So that's generally what I do. But if you have to do it ahead of time, you just file like an amendment or something.
Yeah. If it's after you've already filed it, you can do an amended annual return if there's something that had changed in the prior year, or you can do an amendment. Yeah,
and I find that so difficult to do it halfway through the year, only because since COVID, you know, it's like the efficiency of the government's gone, you know, way down. And I remember I had a client myself personally in my personal business practice, consulting practice, and they had to change a director, and it literally took 9 months during COVID. I mean, it was crazy. And so I'm getting called every week saying, hey, how come this isn't done? How come it's not updated? And then SunBiz ended up having like a calendar of saying when we're processing this by, but it dramatically affected their business because they couldn't do any business without that director being off of they couldn't even open a bank account. It was crazy.
Yep.
So that's why I try and do it ahead of time. I try and plan properly, or I do it on the first. So it automatically happens. So how do you dissolve? So we have the administrative dissolve we talked about. Now we say we just don't want to do it. We fulfilled our obligation. We fulfilled what we were trying to accomplish. So we don't need the LLC anymore. And we want to dissolve the LLC. So that's a voluntary dissolution, correct?
Yep. That's the way to cut off the liability. So you're basically, instead of just saying, hey, I stopped checking in with the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So they just administratively dissolved. You're saying, hey, the remaining members of this LLC have decided it's not worth it anymore. We're going to shut down the business, and you file what's called a voluntary dissolution and let everybody in the world know that now this company is no longer growing, is no longer taking on new business, And all it's going to be doing is winding up its affairs and closing the doors.
So I think the big difference between a voluntary dissolution and a administrative dissolution would be if it's voluntary, I think they have 4 years from the date of the dissolution date to bring legal proceedings against you, and then after 4 years, I think they can't do that anymore if it's voluntarily. I think that's what I remember, if I'm correct. I don't know. But there's statute of limitations anyways, and it depends on the situation.
The idea
right?
is that when you do a voluntary dissolution, nobody should be doing new business with you from that date forward.
Okay,
Right.
yeah.
And so the statute of limitation is going to vary based on what type of claim that they have. So it could be 4 years, could be 5 years, could be 2 years. We don't know what kind of claim they might have against that business. Depends on your nature of your business operations. But the idea is that if it's been dissolved for 5 years voluntarily, you shouldn't be bringing a claim against it unless there's some kind of serious discovery issue that you
Obviously
discovered before that.
Obviously, okay. And then, so obviously we don't suggest using a like DIY formation website or any of those type of things. We obviously I don't suggest it. I don't know about you, but I don't suggest it, for obvious reasons, right? If somebody's offering to do something for free and they're incorporating a company, and this is something that lately, let me put it this way. If you have a business or you're looking at starting a business, and the biggest aspect of starting your business is the actual formation process, because that's like your blueprint, that's your foundation. Why would you want to use a DIY website and do it yourself anyways? Why wouldn't you want to go to somebody with experience who may be able to ask questions that you may not have thought about asking yourself, and helping you develop answers to that, and making sure everything's kind of buttoned up in a way where it helps you with multiple fronts, from estate planning, from asset protection, from, whatever, to having it done right. So I understand, like we said earlier, I understand the gravity towards using a DIY website because it's cheaper, more affordable, especially for startups that are bootstrapping or don't have a big budget. But again, an attorney offers so many other benefits. Same with an accountant, offers so many benefits, right? So we generally suggest using an attorney, a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction, for the formation process. And then obviously a CPA can give tax advice on the tax classification, and how you should kind of keep accounting on that aspect, and help you with other things, because you might have other like investments and things that go into that classification that may make a big difference, right? So that's what I generally suggest. And then what other tips do you have for people that are looking at forming their own business?
Yeah, so I know that the temptation to use templates is very strong. Okay.
Yeah.
The problem is there's so many unknown knowns and unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So without the assistance of an attorney, you may be filling in a blank, and it may end up being the wrong blank to be filled in.
I think that's a big thing. Yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake that people don't realize is they don't know what they don't know. And when you're filling in a blank, you think it's done right. Just because it's printed and it's signed does not mean it's done right.
Right. And if you're going to a non-lawyer to get that template, because that's all they can do, otherwise they're practicing law under Florida law. If they can't tell you what to put into a blank, they can't tell you what the blank really means. They can't really give you any kind of advice other than sit there and type in what you tell them. And if they are providing you advice, that's a big red flag.
Well, because if they can't legally provide you advice, and they're providing you advice or telling you what to do and where to put the I's and cross your T, or dot your I's and cross your T's and so forth, that's a big red flag. So obviously I would like avoid them with like a 20-foot pole.
Well, it happens. Unfortunately, it's an issue, right? We want to make sure that people with a low budget have accessibility to legal services. So we've got this system in place for non-lawyers to be able to provide templates that are crafted by attorneys. But the moment that somebody's asking them to help interpret what's in that language, that's where we run into problems.
Yeah, and
because they want to provide a good service and they think that they know the answer.
Yeah.
But they haven't evaluated all of the facts. They don't know the circumstances. They don't know the questions to ask to be able to provide that.
Maybe their industry, they don't even know their industry, because there are certain nuances to each industry. And not only that,
surprised how many times people come into my office saying, I went to this non-lawyer service and they told me to put this in here. Is this right?
Yeah.
And I say, this does the exact opposite of what you think it is, or this does, this technically does what you think it does, but you didn't understand that this is the consequence. And the consequence was much worse than the original decision. So
yeah, and I obviously, when I help people design their startups, transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur, or help them design their startups, from a marketing perspective and business development perspective, I always say, look, if you can't afford to do it right, then you should not be a business owner. And I see so many people starting businesses and they always fail because they don't do it right from the beginning. And I've learned that lesson the hard way too. I've had businesses where I've started them with other people when I was younger, and we didn't plan it out right. And planning is, I think 80% of the part of being a successful business person is planning right. So if the couple $100 is going to be a big deal breaker for you, then I would suggest not starting a business personally.
Yeah, or you're just paying tuition to the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah, or you're going to learn the hard way, and then hopefully it doesn't cause you a lot of stress. And the whole point of being an entrepreneur is to enjoy what you're doing and be passionate about it. So, yeah, that's I think that's pretty important. So, any other tips you have for somebody that's wanting to start their own LLC?
Yeah, I think big tips are, and of course I'm biased here, but seriously, even if you have already started your business, go talk to an attorney, a business attorney.
I never thought about that. That's actually a really good idea. So if you've already formed your LLC, you're already operating, maybe you have an operating agreement, maybe you don't. Maybe if you do, maybe use that, maybe, book a consultation with your local attorney or whatnot and review that operating agreement, explain to the attorney, hey, this is my current business, this is what I'm doing, this is what I plan on doing, and making sure that operating agreement fits. And, even though it's not required to have an annual meeting for an LLC, what I generally like to do, not always, but generally, is on like the first of the year, sometimes, during Christmas when it's a little bit slower for me, I'll go through I'll look up the company name because I have many LLCs, and I'll say, okay, what is the purpose and the objective of this business? I'll reread the operating agreement to make sure I fully understand it. Maybe I miss something. I'll take some notes, like take a pen, make some notes of changes I want to make. I'll come to an attorney. Now, you're my attorney, so I use you for a lot of stuff. But I'll have you do the changes in the operating agreement, and then we'll file the annual notice or annual return, and then kind of everything gets done at the same time. So we always have like sort of a review structure in place.
Yeah.
And then we make those changes, right? If we need to. If we don't, most of the time we don't. But there are times where we say, hey, the rules have changed. Like here's an example. Multi-member LLC, there was a court case a couple years ago where it's crazy. So, there's so many changes being made that it's good to review it anyways. But yeah, it's very interesting how people just don't review this stuff for 20, 30 years. Then when something happens, so I guess the biggest tip I have would be review your operating agreement, review your annual return yearly, right? Don't be lazy about it.
Yeah, that's very helpful for a lot of people to review. And, looking at an operating agreement for most people, they're just going to look at it like a dictionary. Like I don't know what these.
Their eyes are going to gloss over, and they're going to be like, I don't know. And that happens a lot. Their eyes gloss over, and they just don't understand. And the other thing I think too is with an operating agreement, if you have it prepared by somebody that knows what they're doing, they can explain to you what each clause means, right? So you fully understand what this actually means. Because I think when it comes to a legal jargon, and myself included, that's why I'm bringing it up. Sometimes you're not a lawyer, you haven't gone to school for 8 years, and so you're reading this stuff and you think you know what it means, but a comma could mean the difference between winning a case and losing a case. A comma, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of our joke. Details matters because commas do matter, right? And so I think that paying the extra money, if you're going to do it right, you understand what you're fully getting into and you can protect yourself going forward. And that, again, might raise questions you never thought about asking that you can, change or insert or add.
Yeah. And I think even if you go to see an attorney and the attorney reviews it, explains things to you, and says, hey, is this what you expected this clause to mean? Or did you guys all agree on this stuff? And everything is correct. Yeah,
we're not trying to sell. Like I just want to mention this. We're not trying to sell somebody to use an attorney here. I'm just what we're trying to do is we're trying to help people understand the realities, right? And the consequences of not using one and using one and actually forming an LLC properly.
Well, even if you use an attorney, again, having a second second pair of eyes looking at it, or even just you yourself reviewing it to make sure that it's still what you want is important, just like your estate plan.
Okay. Well, I think those are my questions for today. If you have any questions, you're listening to this or watching this on one of our channels, feel free to comment below and we'll go ahead and try and answer those questions as quickly as possible. Otherwise, have yourself a great day and we'll wrap it up.